Good afternoon. I'm Walt Bauer, and I'd like to welcome you to the Human Development Institute's first spring seminar. We welcome the participants who are joining us online through Zoom, as well as the participants who are here with us at the live presentation at the University of Kentucky. Our presenters will provide an opportunity for questions this afternoon. We welcome questions from all of our participants. Please type your questions in the chat box if you are online. Should you have any questions about CEUs, you can contact me. Please take a moment at the conclusion of the seminar to complete our brief evaluation. The evaluation will be sent to your email address after the seminar. It is really helpful as we plan for upcoming seminars. Now, to introduce today's speakers. Willis Dietz is the Executive Director of Independence Place, a center for independent living. He has worked in the disability field for nearly a decade. Megan Coleman is the Operations Manager of Independence Place and oversees the employment and transition programs at Independence Place. The title of the seminar is Speaking Your Mind, Self-Advocacy and Self-Help Lessons Learned from the History of Independent Living. I'm now going to turn it over to our presenters.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much for coming and being with us. We're really excited to be here. There's the independent living movement for particularly me. It was something that I'd always thought should be at the center of everything we do when we're working with folks with disabilities, but I didn't know that it had a name. I didn't even know it had a movement, and so it was really cool to get the opportunity to join up with Independence Place a couple years ago, and then become the executive director. And so we want to talk today about particularly how the independent living movement translates into services, but also from a consumer standpoint as well. And this is Megan, and so she's been, we've worked together in different venues before. We've done supported employment together, we've done waiver supports together, and so she's also super knowledgeable, more knowledgeable than myself even, and so, but let's get started. So speaking your mind, self-help and self-advocacy lessons. If we're going to talk about the independent living movement, we have to talk about the father of the independent living movement, Ed Roberts. He's, in a lot of ways, everybody who is associated with the independent living movement or with disability services in general should know who Ed Roberts is. That was not the case for me. When I came into the independent living movement, I just started getting to know this wonderful figure. He is probably the single most important person when it comes to talking about disability rights and disability supports and services. When he was 14 years old, he contracted polio just 2 years before the vaccine came out. As a result, his temperature was so high that they rushed him to the hospital, and soon after that he had paralysis from the neck down. This is a picture of him and his family. That's his mom, who, by the way, is also a tremendous advocate for those in the disability world. And in this picture, you can see behind him his iron lung. That was what allowed him to be able to breathe after he became paralyzed. It was at the age of 14, and having gone through what he had gone through, he began to really struggle with losing all of the things that he held dear to him. This is an acquired disability, right? So he lived a normal life up to the age of 14, and then that was stripped away. After his admittance to a polio clinic, he saw really no need to live because everybody was doing everything for him. They wouldn't even let him make choices over certain aspects of his life. Doctors even told his parents that they should hope that he died, because if he were to survive this issue, that he would live in a vegetative state. And so, having no choices over anything, he decided that he no longer wanted to live, and he exercised his last choice, and that was eating. So he stopped eating, and at one point they even began to try to force feed him, which was just also very demeaning in a sense. His weight dropped to 54 pounds, and as a 14-year-old, and you're like growing like crazy, 54 pounds is really, really small, right? So his staff resigned the fact that he wasn't going to cooperate. He wasn't going to comply with what they were trying to do to keep him alive. And so they finally just kind of raised their hands and said, okay, we're We're going to leave you to your own devices and let you do what you want to do, which is exactly what he wanted. And so as his last nurse left, he decided he wanted to live. He said this, he said, "My last special duty nurse left, and the next day I decided I wanted to live." You see, that was the big turning point. Up until then, these nurses were available and doing things for me around the clock. I didn't have to make any decisions for myself because they were always there. When they all finally left, that's when I realized I could have a life despite what everyone was saying. I could make choices and that was freedom. And I started to eat.
And another thing that he actually said, he had heard the doctors tell his parents that they should hope that he wouldn't live and that he would be a vegetable. And he said, "I decided to be an artichoke, a little prickly on the outside with a big heart." And that he also said that the vegetables of the world are uniting and we're not going away.
And so he became just this tremendous activist, even at the age of 14. When he was going through high school, they said, you're not going to be able to graduate because, you can't complete PE. Because you can't participate in PE or physical education, which is so odd to begin with, number one, because he got a great intellect. The other reason why he wasn't going to be able to graduate high school is because he couldn't drive, because he couldn't pass driver's ed. And so he began to say, these are not things that should keep me from being able to obtain a certificate of education or a diploma so that I can move on to the next phase of education in my life. He effected dramatic program housing and accessibility improvements at Berkeley's campus. He was a college graduate from Berkeley University. He was also told at the time when he was working on his degree program and trying to get some additional supports through the Office of Vocational Rehabilitation that he wouldn't be able to work. There's nothing we can do. Your disability is too severe for you to be able to do anything. And so that was really the momentum he needed to create what was called the Rolling Quads on Berkeley's campus. And that small group of individuals with and without disabilities began to say, you know what, disability is so widespread and services are so necessary for everybody. We want to create a movement that allows people with significant disabilities to live life.
And so just an example of some of the advocacy that the Rolling Quads were doing was they went and they said, we need curb cuts put in sidewalks. We can't get anywhere in the city. And when they proposed this, they were told, well, we don't need curb cuts. Nobody in wheelchairs are out in the community. And they responded with, well, actually, there are plenty of people that use wheelchairs or walkers to get around. You're just not seeing them because there's not accessibility. So that city became the first city with curb cuts in their sidewalks. And they just really used that momentum to open the first Center for Independent Living in California. And then later, Ed actually became the California State Director of OVR, and he was the first director with a disability.
So he affected change in a lot of different ways. And really, a lot of the things that we think about, we don't even think about today because these things were fought for early on. I think it's interesting, it wasn't until the 90s where people started carrying luggage with wheels on it because there wasn't any curb cuts. You couldn't just roll your suitcase anywhere. You had to carry it. And so, the changes that they affected, it changed the dynamic for everybody's lifestyle. And I think that's also really important because when we talk about the independent living movement, we're kind of looking at it from the perspective, we're trying to help people with disabilities, but really this is a movement that's for all of, like everyone, anybody who's breathing, anybody's a human being. And so I think that's also kind of important to keep in mind.
And so this independent living movement that we're talking about actually happened alongside many other movements during the late 60s. So the civil rights movement was happening, consumerism, self-help, demedicalization, deinstitutionalization, the women's movement, and the LGBTQ movement. It's
I think, a really important note that when we're talking about all of these movements, everyone is affected by disability. There's not like this spectrum where it's just these types of people who can become disabled or have a disability. Really, disability spans the spectrum of socioeconomic stratas. It is not bound by race or ethnicity, and it's not contingent on anyone's age or gender. And so when we're talking about the independent living movement, it is everybody's right to be an activist in it. In the United States, 1 in 5 people have a disability. In Kentucky, it's 1 in 3 on the eastern side of the state, and about 1 in every 4 individuals who have a disability throughout Kentucky as a whole. So what is the independent living movement all about? Why was it, or what was it trying to accomplish? Well, it started out as a moral imperative. It was trying to buck against that medical model and social service model that we're used to seeing. The purpose of the movement was and is today to promote a philosophy of independent living, which at its core and at its foundation is a philosophy of consumer control. The individual, it gives credence to this idea that the person who has a disability is the expert in how their disability affects them. There's not this, it's kind of foreign to a person with a disability to say somebody else knows better how their disability affects them, right? And so that's the beauty of consumer control, is it gives the opportunity for individuals to take the driver's seat, right? And get out of the passenger seat and be an active part in their treatment plans and their support plans. Peer support, self-help and self-determination, equal access, individual and systems advocacy, all of these things were at the cornerstones, if you will, of the independent living movement. And it's designed to maximize the leadership, empowerment, independence, and productivity of individuals with disabilities and integrating them into all of American society, which is huge.
And then so just to really narrow down some of those key components that we've talked about, that self-direction and consumer control. So not only are consumers identifying what they want to be working on, but 50% of our staff and our board have to be individuals with disabilities, over 50%. So we really take that to the heart of everything that we do. Equal access. Cross disability means that we serve anyone with any type of disability across any age. And then there's the dignity of risk. And the dignity of risk is really just giving people the opportunity to try something that may have some risk attached to it. That would be really important not to take away from people. So just a super simple example would be if somebody that you're working with comes to you and says, I want to go to college. Well, you might think in your head that person is not going to succeed if they try to go to college classes. However, if we work with them with that goal and put supports around them, they are going to have the risk, just like anybody else going to college, that they're going to pass or they're going to fail, but giving them the opportunity to actually try and do that.
So some of the services that Ed wanted to see incorporated into supports are information and referral. And again, coming from the perspective of consumer control and peer support, you know, it's individuals working, or individuals with disabilities working for individuals with disabilities. And so when somebody calls and says, I need some information, or I need to be referred to a particular agency, it's really helpful if a person that you're talking to is a person with a disability and say, this is what I've experienced, these are the services and supports that I know about that can really be of benefit to you. Individuals and systems advocacy, there's a lot of different things that we've done in that, or you see across, I mean, again, the ADA is born out of Centers for Independent Living, or the independent living movement. Independent living skills training, which is different for everyone. There's not one person who's going to be working on the same thing, and these are things that they are identifying and they are articulating as necessary. And then youth and adult transition. So each of these services are to be consumer directed at every level. Goals and action steps are even to be articulated by that consumer. There can be guidance. There are things that we want to help them articulate, and really we want to be the facilitator of self-awareness. And so this gives us the parameters for the independent living paradigm. So it is really just a response to historical perceptions and behaviors. You know, this idea of projection and what does it mean to have a disability, and trying to put yourself in the shoes of somebody with a disability. Oftentimes when we do that, we think very negative thoughts. Man, if I had to utilize a wheelchair, that's so hard and so horrible. And you know, for people who utilize chairs, that's not necessarily how they feel about their life. There's this ideal body. You know, there's the perfect body type out there, and I need to try to go after that and become that. And you know, we see it on magazines, and this is what I need to look like. And then there's generalization. It's like, if you have a spinal cord injury, then everybody who has a spinal cord injury has the same issues as everybody else, which is not true. Or, you know, we have an individual in our office, his name is Ryan, who has a spinal cord injury and he uses a wheelchair. Oftentimes people are like, oh, do you know Mark? He uses a wheelchair too. And so like all of a sudden everybody who has a spinal cord injury and uses a wheelchair knows everybody in a wheelchair. And that's kind of ridiculous to even think. And so this medical model is assuming this, that doctors are the experts and they're going to issue treatment plans via a chain of command. And those who are receiving that treatment plan are to act as the sick patient who needs to be fixed, who needs to be healed, who needs to undergo these changes so they can have a better life. The IL paradigm is this shift where the patient is the expert in how their disability affects them, and they're an active participant with doctors who are experts in their respective fields. And so it's not saying that doctors aren't necessary. It's not saying that providers aren't necessary. It's reorienting our minds to think that when we're working with an individual, we're going to ask questions and we're going to be specialists, but they're going to tell us how things are going to work out. I often think of this when I go to the doctor and they prescribe medications. If I start taking that medication and I have an adverse reaction to it, I'm going to call my doctor back and say, hey, this isn't working. I need a different medication because I got a rash everywhere now. And what are they going to do? They're going to say, oh, okay, well, you have an allergic reaction to this. We're going to change that out. Oftentimes, we don't see that in the disability field. They're kind of like, well, we're just going to piecemeal this together and see what happens and see, and then we'll see if it, the behaviors change or, we have a positive outcome. And if not, we'll just keep on trying instead of really letting the consumer speak for themselves on that. So you have this in your handouts. This is the independent living paradigm. We're not going to go over this, but I do think it's important to talk about. We've got a question, though.
We have a question from Renee online.
Hi, Renee.
How often are medical students trained in the IL paradigm?
That is a really, really amazing question. I wish I could say often, but I don't think that is necessarily a part of their training. That said, I know at the University of Kentucky, they do have practicals where folks come in. I know that, for instance, in the dental field, my wife's a dentist, and so I can speak to that. But there's a person who comes, actually Jason Jones, who works for the Human Development Institute, would go and do a day on disability awareness and talk about how that works and what does it mean to let a person who is in a wheelchair stay in the wheelchair for treatment. A lot of times you go into a dental office and they already have a chair there, and so they want that person to transfer from their chair into their chair so that they can perform dental procedures on them. Well, a lot of people don't know, or dentists may not know that this person has a catheter, or and transferring them could be painful. It could cause issues. Getting them back into the chair could be difficult. And a lot of chairs today, you can actually recline them and do dental services there. So that's one aspect. But I think if you know people or have connections with medical schools or institutions of that nature, having them include that would be really, really important. And that's something that Centers for Independent Living do. We are here to educate providers and medical professionals in that, doing seminars just like this. And so that's a really, really important question. It's not that it's not happening. I just think it could happen a lot more. And so in this, taking a look, so look at this, the definition on the medical model side. This is they look at the individual and say they have a physical or they have a mental impairment, a lack of vocational skills, a lack of education, kind of giving this thought, they're broken and we need to fix them. The response on the independent living side or the disability pride side is that we may have a dependence on professionals, family members, and others, but they should not be hostile to us. Right? The environment should be inviting. There should not be a lack of legal protection. In other words, there should be plenty of legal protections for us as those with individuals with disabilities as there would be for anybody else. Kind of look down here to the solution to the problem. So the medical model or the social service model says that there should be professional interventions and treatments, case management or volunteer work. It kind of looks at it from the perspective of pity. really the disability pride paradigm or the independent living paradigm says, no, the biggest thing that we need to do in training our individuals with disabilities is advocacy. It's barrier removal. It's taking it and saying they're not necessarily the problem. The environment is the problem. People, other people looking at them are the problem. And it starts with just understanding there are individuals who have disabilities, but they are first and foremost people, and they want to be treated as such. And that's, I think, really, really important. So we've kind of talked about this in an abstract view. And so what I want to do now is we want to talk about one of our consumers. Her name is Megan, and we want to kind of analyze and look at what does the world look like if we do not have the independent living paradigm. What does it look like through a social service or a medical model? They're not necessarily bad, but there are some issues that I think we can work with and kind of increase quality of life. So let's see what Megan has to say.
Anxiety can be crippling. Hallucinations, I'll need more support. Let me think. Oh, I remember one time at Homebound, my Homebound was teaching me, I'm trying to do my work, and there's like 20 other just people and animals in the room just screaming, and I'm trying so hard to focus, and it's just, and I'm like, I can't, yeah.
It's just hard. It's hard to see your friends' kids go on through middle school and high school, going to dances, going to prom, hanging out with their friends, and seeing your child, just her goal is to get to go to school every day.
People just treat you more gingerly, like you're gonna break, and just treating like I could snap.
She saw a rabbit with a man's face following her. I kind of had almost like a punch in the gut feeling, kind of a cold, I'm going to be sick feeling, because it struck me that she believes this is real. Something is going on besides depression and anxiety. So I called her psychiatrist, and she was diagnosed with childhood onset schizophrenia when she was at the end of 6th grade.
People knew that I was hallucinating. And like, once people knew, I was kind of the girl that went crazy, you know?
Okay. So what are some of the examples from Megan's story on how people perceived her, or how did they, or in other words, how did they treat Megan?
She said that they treated her gingerly, like she was going to break.
Gingerly, she's going to break. And Megan's an individual that has an unseen disability, right? So it's maybe even harder, but then you get to know her, and you're like, oh, you have hallucinations, and oh my goodness, what does that mean? It's like, are you hallucinating right now? And then you're like, well, and maybe she says yes, and then she's like, well, where are you hallucinating? She points to him, and then everybody in the room looks at where she's hallucinating. Well, then it gives credence to those hallucinations, right? And these are just things that hopefully, as providers, we don't do, right? We don't want to feed into that. We don't want to treat people gingerly. or as if they could break. What are some other examples?
Like you're invisible.
Yeah.
Don't acknowledge them at all.
Yeah. And then it's like, oh, this is too much for me to even have. I don't even want to address what's going on.
Don't look at them. Maybe they won't see them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the thing that bothers me the most about her story is at the very end, she's like, once they found out, they treated me like I was just a crazy person. And really to talk to her, she's not at all. And that's the hard part. So that is what Ed is bucking against. So what are the outcomes that we're looking for? Oh, we got a question?
From online, it's Kelly from online. Kelly says, talk to me, not a caregiver or a relative that came along.
Yeah. So say it one more time. Make sure I understood.
Kelly says, and this is Kelly online, talk to me, not a caregiver or relative that came along.
Absolutely.
Talk about it.
Yeah. I think and that as providers is one of the hardest things to do. Like you get so caught up in wanting to help that you forget that the person you're trying to help is sitting right there with you.
And can answer the question.
And can answer those questions. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you, Kelly. That I think is, if there's anything else that you take away from today as a provider or a caregiver, please take that. Individuals want to be heard and they want to participate. They're there. We are there for them, right? Not them there for us. And I think that's a big part of that. So some of the outcomes that Ed is looking for, we want to get away from that. We want to get away from society looking at Megan and saying, oh, she's just crazy. So what is that? The first is foundational, and that is consumer control. It has to be established. Secondly, it requires consumers to become self-advocates. You can't take control of your supports and not be an advocate, right? So as providers, as caregivers, as guardians, view your son, your daughter, and your consumer or your client, view them first as a person and then as an advocate. And we're gonna say that several times because we want that to be a part of the way we think. And then it demands that the community view the disability community as peers. It's no longer like we're just going to put those with disabilities on one end of the room and then everybody else gets to hang out on the other side. We want an inclusive environment. We want it to all look accessible. You know, there's a T-shirt. I can't remember the person who created it, but basically it's just a T-shirt that says the future is accessible. And like there's going to be a day where things like this will be no more because the future will be fully accessible.
And so to tie into that, one of the outcomes we want to see is that it demonstrates that people with disabilities are vital to the community. So they have worth, they have value, they have a purpose just like any other person. And then that we develop a person-first standard. So again, not looking at a person and seeing their disability, but looking at a person and seeing the person. And Ed Roberts said this, we're going to develop leadership that has a fundamental difference. That is, it's inclusive. It believes in people and in our strengths together, and we are going to change our society.
So the independent living movement is not just for those with disabilities. It's for the society as a whole. It's for Lexington and everybody who lives in Lexington. It's for Kentucky and everybody who lives in Kentucky, able-bodied or not. And so I think that's something that we need to really consider. So what kind of questions do we have about the independent living paradigm and the independent living movement? And it's okay if you don't have questions, but we want to give you time to ask those. So are we beginning to see some ways that this is affecting the way you think about people with disabilities? Hopefully it is, and so be considering as we go on how that's going to change the way you view individuals you serve or view your child as we go through. All right, so now that we've gotten that out of the way, we can really start talking about self-help and self-advocacy, and we need to start by first defining that and what do they look like and what are the differences of those. And so I'm going to let Megan take that over.
All right, so first we're just going to talk about two definitions of what self-advocacy and self-help are. And so self-advocacy is the act of advocating for yourself and your rights, speaking up for and protecting yourself, and that's with or without the help of others. And self-help is the act of helping or improving yourself. So you might get suggestions and encouragement from others, but you do the action steps on your own. And so I think it's really important to note the term self is the first thing in both of these. It's something that it's something that you have to do on your own. It's not saying that support professionals or formal supports or guidance is useless, but it's making sure that those formal supports are utilized in a meaningful and practical way that ensures consumer control.
So self-help.
So self-help is motivated by self-identified interests that are expressed through direct actions by an individual. So those self-interests should be identified and articulated by the individual. It's not other people saying what they want for them. It's actually the individual saying what they want to do and what they want to work towards. However, it can be aided by selected guidance. So that's determining I want a certain family member, a friend, the professionals that work with me to really help me either determine what I want my goals to be, or I have this goal, now what do I do with it? What are the action steps that I can work towards? But these are things that only the individual can accomplish. So once those action steps are determined, that individual has to do it. And so just a super simple example of that would be, I've decided I want to start working out because I want to be healthier. So that's my goal. I've identified that myself. However, I have no idea how to do that. So I'm going to either talk to friends or family that really love to work out and that are knowledgeable, or I'm going to go talk to a personal trainer at a gym and really get some guidance, that selected guidance. I have chosen those people that I want to help me, and they're going to help me determine those action steps of I'm going to go to the gym 3 times a week and do cardio at least twice, and I'm going to lift at least once. However, they cannot get me to the gym and make me lift those weights. I have to do those things on my own.
And I think too, from the provider perspective, we are facilitators in helping people become self-aware, right? So a lot of times we'll have people say, well, you know, we want this all sounds really good in principle, but it's just not practical. And so, you know, this just doesn't work for Johnny. I would say that it can work for Johnny, and that you should find ways to help him become self-aware, that he has rights, that he has choices, and that he can exercise those choices and those rights. If he's unaware that he has choices and rights, he may not operate in that way. It's kind of like the same way, well, we don't really have people who utilize sidewalks here at Berkeley, and so we're just not going to put curb cuts in. Well, that's not right thinking, right? If you put the curb cuts in, then people who utilize wheelchairs can get around. And so it's the same way with self-help. If they don't know that they can, they won't operate as such. But if we as providers begin to advocate in that way, it changes the game. And I think that's something to keep in mind. All right, so as we talk about what it is, it's important to identify what it is not. So self-help is not providing unsolicited guidance or advice on someone's goals. It's not simply saying these are the goals you're going to work on because this is what we've seen work in the past, for instance. It is not taking somebody's goals as a provider. Maybe you're a DSP. You're looking at those goals and say, well, this is the best way to accomplish this goal. We're going to do it this way. Make sure that you're letting them participate in that activity. Let them choose how they're going to accomplish those goals. Maybe give suggestions and give them choices to choose from, and then have them become more active. There is a transition period for everybody in this. Like, this will be a difficult thing. If you've never really thought in this way, it'll be difficult for you to implement this. And so there is a growing period, but that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. And so I think that's important. It also is that providing direct supports, it is not providing direct supports when an individual is capable of completing those action steps.
So for me, this is probably one of the hardest things for me to do, and it was one of the harder things for me to learn, because when I'm working with somebody, I really want to see them be successful. And so if I can do something to help them be successful, I'm going to do it. However, they need to be doing those things on their own. Just like I wouldn't want my mom or dad to come down and do things for me, they probably don't want other people doing things for them. So just a super simple example for me as an employment specialist. So when I first started, if we had put in job applications, I would call the employer and follow up on that job application. Okay, that's not really teaching the consumer how to become independent and how to follow up on that and how to talk to an employer. That's just teaching them that somebody else should do it for them. And so I quickly realized, wait a minute, they know how to use the phone. They might not know what to say, and I can coach them on what to say. But if they learn that, they can make those phone calls, and in the future, they're not going to need me. And it also helps the employer see that person as an individual that's going to be a valuable member of their team, because they can call and make that phone call on their own. And it just really helped me see individuals as people that are capable and able to do those things rather than needing me. I'm really just there for support and to help them develop those skills to be able to accomplish their tasks. And then the third one is just limiting options or avenues due to perceived deficits due to an individual's disabilities. So as soon as we put limits on somebody, their options are automatically, lessened. So if we're doing that, they're not going to be able to reach their full potential. And then there is a quote by Nancy Ward, who is a self-advocate in the disability rights movement. And she said that empowerment is when you have gained the confidence in yourself to have the light bulb go on in your head. You realize you can take control of your life and you understand that now you have done it. And this really just reminded me of one of my consumers. Her name is Brandy. She came to us wanting to find a new job. She was working at Kroger as a courtesy clerk. She liked the job. She had been there for almost 2 years, but she wasn't working up like she wanted to. She wasn't able to get a different job within Kroger. And she really thought she had some skills that she could use, but she had no clue what those were. And so while I was working with her and I was pointing out her skills that she had learned in her job, she had great customer service skills and she had really good money skills. So she knows how to count money and how to serve her customers. And so just identifying those things really helped her be empowered to say, okay, I'm ready to find a new job. And so she decided to go work at Starbucks. She's been there for almost 2 years, and she has learned how to work the cash register. She's learned even more customer service skills. She's starting to learn a lot more skills. She was able to advocate to get accommodations. She can sometimes get worried about what others are thinking of her. And so at first I would go and talk to her supervisor with her and say, okay, how's she doing? What she need to work on? But Brandy now has those conversations on her own. She asks her supervisor for those evaluations so that she can make improvements to her work. And so that was her employment. But also while we were working together, she says, well, I want to start driving. I need my driver's license, because she lives out where the bus doesn't go. So she worked on getting her driver's license, became more independent in that way. She's taking herself to work. She's taking her sister to work. She's going to run her own errands. And through that, she said, okay, well, if I can drive and I can get myself to work, I want to live on my own. And so that's the next goal she's working towards. One of those things is she knows how to do laundry. She knows how to clean. She doesn't know how to cook. Well, you can't live on your own if you don't have food to eat, because you're not going to eat. So we have been able to work with her to, identify some food she wants to be able to make. She now has just like a basic ability to make certain recipes throughout the week. She can cook for herself. She can cook for her friends. And so just finding those skills and that little bit of empowerment really went a long way to the point where she's hopefully going to be, if she motivates herself enough, to live on her own, because she can do it.
So how do we implement? So first one, we've already said it. We're going to say it again in the next few slides, but it's to put away our preconceived notions of ability for those we serve. Let them decide what they're going to be capable of. If they don't think they are capable of doing things, encourage them to try new things and encourage them to be active participants in what they're wanting to achieve for their life. We want to empower people to know what they can do and what they want to do. And so again, we don't want to eliminate options. We want to be the ones who say, you want to go do that? Go for it. And well, let's just see what happens. The worst thing is we got to come back to the drawing board and try again. And letting people have that opportunity to fail and then learn from those